hola. Oh, here we are.
Session number 2?
Well, I guess technically speaking, it will be number 1, since the intro was the 0 session, right? So, okay, let's get it going with some first from the introduction to get some practical questions.
So, Leonid, we were talking last time about, you mentioned something that have a big echo for me as a mother of a not so young girl with a disability. And that's the thing that you mentioned, that every family usually made the same mistakes, that you've seen several parents go over and over the same things. And the first thing that comes to my mind is, what are those errors that you see?
Okay, so that's really, the list is long. Let's put it this way.
Okay, be gentle with us.
Okay, be gentle. But you see, really, I think that really the whole thing starts with the big mindset and the understanding of really the larger context. Because let's sort of look at the big picture. And the big picture is that if we count the total sort of history of mankind, depending on how you count, but you want, right? But if you take the official sort of line, right? So the 100,000 years since Cro-Magnon, right? So what does it mean? At the average generation of 20 years, that's like 5,000 generations, right? And those 5,000 generations has really equipped us with lots of presets, pre-wires, and the processing mechanisms which we activate without thinking, that come through whatever, like the fastest possible reactions through spontaneous responses, mother saving the child, right? So like cases of either it's sacrifice or altruism and all kind of these things, right? So, and it's important to understand that actually, if you look at, like just directly at it, how many generations of a steady survival of the children with, let's say, GMFCS level 4 and 5 and even level 3 we have. So
that's maybe 1, 2 or 3 generations, no further than that.
That's it. So, and 3 generations is relatively generous, right? So 3 generations brings us like 60 years back. So that's the 1960s. And, even in the most advanced countries, back then, early 60s was still the label, the crippled, the invalid, right? So the retard and all these other things. So even if they survived, the total kind of even social acceptance was extremely low. So,
and what was the life expectancy back then?
Well, I mean, there are variations there, but you see, I remember that, for instance, even if you look at the literature from the 80s, so the average life expectancy of the person with quadriplegic condition was something like 15 years. So with the mortality rates being like 5-6 times higher than the general population, right? Meaning that some of them were making it up to 30 and 40, but that would be a relatively rare percentage, right? So that's why the whole idea has never been that, well, this is something of a long-term project on the one hand, and then, we also have to take into account that, even within the medical professions, the mindsets, they take certain time to change, right? So if the person is in their profession for, like, say, from graduating to retirement for about, say, 40 years, so the things that they've learned in the beginning, they stay. And you can see it very well that, well, of course, the Western countries now, they're a lot more advanced in terms of their sort of political correctness on the one hand. On the other hand, it's quite a genuine, attempt, at least attempt, to get the inclusion and the, like, integration of the kids, even in the most severe conditions, in their everyday life, or in kind of somehow regular life.
Say the right word, intent.
Yeah, of course, that's the intent.
I think it's 177 countries that signed the Convention of the rights of people with disabilities. But I know most of the countries are intending to be inclusive,
Yeah, but
especially with kids that are severe.
absolutely, absolutely. And I wouldn't really even put it on the kind of the bad intentions or on the fake intentions there, right? So you see, a
Of
lot there
course.
depends on their just objective difficulties. But what I was saying is that if you look at the early generations there, still understanding and the whole like framework on which even the psychological and neurological assessment works, right? So it all takes into account only the most obvious external signs, So the person should be able to respond to verbal commands and the verbal instructions. The person should be able to perform certain, purposeful actions. The person should be able to link, A and B's and meet, whatever tests and criteria which are divided by age group and by classes and so on and so forth. So, and then, based on that, you get some sort of really strong stamps: intelligent or not so intelligent, or impaired or intellectually challenged, and all these kind of things. Even in the later years, they've been sort of tried to make them sound nicer, right? But still, the big picture is that it's like the framework of the social and medical and like even general like human surrounding interaction doesn't really bring much understanding to the kids, especially with the level 4 and level 5 disabilities, and the ones who are having challenges in the direct expression via the conventional means of communication, let's put it like this, right? So that's really a big challenge, and that's why, getting back to the beginning of our conversation, is that because there's really no experience, so just 2 generations of more or less steady survival, reasonable transformation of the urban infrastructure, and like in countries sort of just if you take the second world or the third world, that's not even happening, right? So all this kind of disabled friendly opportunities, whether it's walking the streets or taking the public transportation or parking and all these other things. So in that sense, we're actually facing a very, very new phenomenon. So these kids are really in front of us. These are what I see it as the front line of the frontiers of the evolution. So this is the first time that this cluster of population systematically survives. And by systematically surviving, they are presenting the new, unknown challenges to parenting and upbringing that were never present in our entire history. So that means that all of our presets, pre-wiring, instinctive actions, instinctive system of values, and so on, they all misfire. So let me give you a simple example, right? Just very simple. Like, for instance, we can refer to you and let's say the situation with Russia, right? So Russia is non-verbal, right? In terms of not being able to articulate and so on. Now, but on the other hand, it's very clear she understands the significant part of the verbal interaction, right, and the speech that is addressed to her. Now,
Yes.
in this kind of one-way street, this thing in itself, for a lot of parents, again, first of all, who would teach you how to deal with it? what do you do out, what can you make out of this situation? So your natural instinct as a parent say, number one, I have to speak more to her, maybe, like if I speak more, I will expand her vocabulary, and then, she will get smarter, and maybe at some point, ping, it will click, and she will say something back to me. Wow, that will be great celebration, right? So then on the other hand, you think, okay, so I should really try to verbalize as many things as are happening, whether it's, feeding process, whether it's, getting the transitions from chair to the, from one chair to another, or getting, from the stroller into the car, or any kind of those things, right? So the more, even changing the diapers or whatever, right? So you see, the more I talk, the better, right? So that's another thing that kind of comes to mind and say, oh, that should be a good idea, right? And then on the other hand comes the idea of, well, I should actually reward her and help her as much as possible, or facilitate as much as possible her attempts to do some verbal response towards me, right? So you see, like when she's trying to say a word or whatever, or trying to do the speech therapy and this kind of action, right? So you see, all this is very intuitive, right? And kind of sounds as a perfectly, smart course of action. But in reality, there are tons of things that you're missing in this format, right? So the first thing is very simple. When you are talking to a person, words are being processed where? High up, right? At the cortical level of the brain. So,
Yes.
what happens if you're processing things at the cortical level of the brain? That means that the activity goes up, but if the cortical activity goes up, what comes as the indivisible other side of the coin, the general muscle tone also goes up, right? So
yeah, but we have to leave the muscle tone for another conversation.
That's right.
You're very enthusiastic, and we love that. But let's keep with this main idea that we're talking about, this the survival of the people with disability, and that explains the current situation where all parents are improvising. I see the same thing here. I don't have 26 years of experience, but about 12, and I see the same things. We're all repeating the same. We're trying to, what I put it, like we're trying to invent the wheel all over again, and each one of us, because we don't know what to do. And what you're saying released a lot of pressure out of our back, because we understand that it's new to us and to everybody as human race,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And number two.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the first things, right? So it's just, if I, loop it back, my previous example with the muscle tone, right, is that it's just an illustration, right? I wouldn't go into the, into the nuances of the muscle tone, right? But then just to understand that simple fact that by means of talking to her, right, so out of your best intentions, what happens? The muscle tone goes up. So for her, that actually translates into the global extension when she starts, like sliding out in her chair, tenses up and so on. So this simple thing, if you put yourself in her shoes, right, you think that you are being a very nice mother who is talking to her in the softest possible voice and giving her nice experiences, but for her, it's like becomes one of those challenges, right? So you see, every time she has to process your words, so she actually has to pay with the shooting, with the muscle tone shooting up, right? So that's
a challenge, be able to shift your mindset and put yourself on what is going on with her.
Exactly. That's the challenge, and that's, probably has to be the kind of, if we try to keep it in the short digestible pieces. So that's really the key sort of take and the key message from this particular set, right? Is that we want to make this point, that meet the child where she is. right? So you see, be aware that this is a special situation with everything interconnected. And then don't go on instincts, because the instincts most likely are going to be misleading. And don't beat yourself on that. That's really, you are the pioneer, you are at the frontiers, and there is no one better than you in that sense, and the mistakes are inevitable. But what we have to
Of
take
course.
out of this is that, well, although mistakes are inevitable, it makes sense to learn as much as possible. Set up the learning budget for yourself, set up the whole idea of kind of taking it onto yourself to, evolve as a parent, and, get more professional, right? More professional in your parenting skills. And that's really the key message of this first mode.
And I think it's a great message to motivate people and to end this conversation, because you you made a great point and very eloquent.
Okay, see you in the next episode.
Okay. Thank you, Leonid. Bye.